بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا قوا أنفسكم وأهليكم نارا وقودها الناس والحجارة عليها ملائكة غلاظ شداد لا يعصون الله ما أمرهم ويفعلون ما يؤمرون صدق الله العظيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا مولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. Today's topic is connected to our previous couple of sessions, discourse with children. This is about communication, and communication is a big word, a key word, not just in our discussion today, but in the whole world and how it works, how it goes around at every level. We're talking here about within and between communities, within nations. We're talking about within companies and businesses, within organizations. It's all about communication. And one key quality of the human being is communicating. Allah Azza wa Jal mentions it as a special favor in the beginning of Surah Ar-Rahman, after mentioning the ni'mah and blessing of the revelation of the Quran and the creation of al-insan, the human being. Allah Ta'ala says, Allamahul bayan. We taught him to speak. Bayan is the ability to talk clearly and to explain yourself. And this is connected in a way that can't be separated with intelligence and intellect. You can't speak and express yourself if you have nothing to express. So it's about the exchange of information and knowledge. So one of the qualities and attributes which makes us distinct as human beings, and which Allah mentions as a special favor in numerous places in the Quran, is our nutq, our bayan, our ability to speak. So this is also the case within family life. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam described the Muslimun, al-Muslimuna, al-Mu'minuna, the believers, like a single human being. كَرَجُلٍ وَاحِدٍ إِنِ اشْتَكَى عَيْنُهُ اشْتَكَى كُلُّ وَإِنِ اشْتَكَى رَأْسُهُ اشْتَكَى كُلُّ. If he suffers in his eye, then the whole person suffers. And if he suffers in his head, then the whole person suffers. He suffers from top to toe. A person will develop a fever and will begin to move about and search for a solution to treat the problem in one part of his body. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is describing all of us as one person. Now, I find this interesting because I was reading some work by Shah Waliullah rahimahullah ta'ala, and he mentions that the concept of city life and citizenship in Islam is very similar. The citizens of a state, a city, are like one human being. And if you conceptualize it like this, what does this mean? It means it's one for all and all for one. It means when communities suffer, or when individuals in those communities, tiers of those communities suffer, when strata from society, classes of society suffer, everybody else should also be affected by this. They should feel that suffering. And so I'm wanting us to use this metaphor, this analogy today, in a smaller version, a smaller piece of society. And we're talking about the family unit here. If this can be the case for the whole world over, and if this can be the case for city life and the citizen, surely within our family sphere we should be feeling for each other. Whether we are children or parents, brothers or sisters, siblings, couples, spouses, nephews, nieces, grandchildren, whatever our sort of relative role to the rest of the family, we are all one. And this is expressed through communication. Now, of course, this isn't all going to be open communication through words which we speak. It can be through body language, it can be through our interactions. But our routines should not become such that we are disconnected, and there is a disconnect between our hearts as a consequence, where we each live our separate lives with no interaction or overlap whatsoever, beyond the fact that we sleep in the same space. And I'm using the word sleep here because often that's what happens now, where it's just about sleeping in your own bed in your part of the house. In some family scenarios where meals are not taken together and there is very little interaction and communication, and no effort is made to achieve this either. And now this has been brought into sort of focus, sharp focus during lockdown, and for many it's been a positive experience. It gives us an opportunity to reflect on our own family situation and circumstances. So let us remember the key word here. We're talking about talking to each other, we're talking about discourse, we're talking about communication. Now, another point to move on from this sort of intro, the importance of being as one, as a family unit and feeling for one another. To move on, another piece of advice here, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, أنزلوا الناس منازلهم أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Treat people according to their ranks and statuses. Now, this is a very general hadith. It's from the Jawami al-Kalim. It's a miracle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It applies universally. So we're not just talking about anybody you meet as an individual. So when for example, a government receives an ambassador or a leader or a governor from another government, then they are treated according to their rank and status. Even if the connection, the sort of relationship between the two nations is a difficult one, there is still a certain protocol given to the guest, to the ambassador, to the safir, to the spokesman. Similarly, if we come to another level, we can talk about two businesses and their representatives communicating with one another. Or we can talk about a community representative visiting another community. So in all of these scenarios too, and we can talk about the guests which come to your front door. How do you welcome a person at your front door? Are they a random person? Are they a sales rep? Are they a person that you know? Are they a family member? How are you going to receive them? So of course you would want to treat all of them in an appropriate way, but you wouldn't treat them all the same. Each one would be given a different type of protocol. And you do this and you take it into your stride and you naturally tend to know. But if you give it some further thought, then this goes beyond this. This hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is also taught through his example. We find Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam speaking to children, speaking to elderly people, speaking to elderly people with patience. An old lady stops Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and on the street, and she begins to talk about her woes, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has patience to listen to her. And sometimes, and it's not fair to generalize, but sometimes all elderly people, because of their specific circumstances, can talk in a way which tests the patience of young people who are in a rush to move on, shall we say. So sometimes young people might not have time for older people so that they can listen to them attentively. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam showed understanding and sympathy and humbleness in listening to this old lady. And there are so many other examples. Another example is when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is talking to children, and he has the attention of the child, and he talks to the child in a way that is appropriate for the child's sort of level of development. So the Prophet ﷺ's interaction with different people and the Prophet ﷺ's ability, shall we say, the Prophet ﷺ's khuluq and manner in which he communicated with people based on the other person's need. Now this was also a miracle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allama Anwar Shah Kashmiri rahimahullah, the great muhaddith, he says that one of the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ was that he could address everybody at the same time and still be everybody's level. His words were so sort of encompassing. You know, when you talk to an audience, normally a person who's talking in lay terms can address an audience of people who are lay people, and they're not they don't have a deep knowledge of a particular subject. So he will bring his communication down to a level where they can all understand. And if you have an expert talking about a subject, then he may communicate to his audience at a level in which they can understand, if they are experts. But you will rarely find a speaker who can speak in a way which is both academic and relevant to the layperson simultaneously. If you walk into a lecture in a university and the lecture is being delivered on a specific subject, the people who have some understanding of that subject, some grasp, will be able to understand what's being said. So to be able to communicate to an audience who has a different variety, an audience in which there are different levels of understanding, and the speaker is addressing everyone simultaneously and they're all taking their own benefit, is not something which is easy to achieve. So chime, for the message to chime with everybody, for it to ring a bell with everybody, for it to be in line with everybody's understanding. And yet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this was his miracle. When he would address an audience, everybody would take their share of the message. But generally speaking, this isn't the case. So the Prophet ﷺ would, when he would address somebody, he would talk to them at their level. The way he talks to his wives, the way the Prophet ﷺ talks to his daughters and children, the way he talks to the young people, to the elderly people. So this is a sunnah as well. So to the family unit then, communication and discourse. How do we talk to our children? Now another sunnah which we learn from the Prophet ﷺ, and I'm moving on to the next point, is acknowledgement. And what I mean by this is, sometimes as adults we can dismiss children on the basis that they are very young. And I'm talking about different age groups. So some adults treat children in a very dismissive way. You know, the old English saying that children should be seen and not heard. So they're not important enough to give any time to. That's the sort of idea at the back of the minds of some people, which is completely the opposite of what our deen is teaching us. It doesn't mean that the children shouldn't be taught basic adab and etiquette when children are sensible enough to understand. Then when Rasulullah ﷺ is lifting up his grandchild onto the mimbar, this is when the grandchild is at an age when that can be expected, that the grandchild will not understand. But when that is not the case, then this doesn't happen. So depending on the age of the child, you respond appropriately. So children are acknowledged in different ways at different ages. So of course, this is the child's responsibility based on the child's understanding, but this doesn't mean that this should be dismissed and not given attention. And this is the general adab of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his sunnah. When he would address somebody, he would look at them directly and he would turn fully. He wouldn't look at someone out of the corner of his eye, and the Prophet would not just turn his head, he would turn his whole person towards the person he was talking to. So this is a sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in its own right. When his own daughters would come, when Fatima radiallahu anha would visit Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would rise up, he would kiss her on her forehead or hand, he would take her hand and he would sit her in his own place, He would move for her. And when he would visit her house, she would also receive him in a similar manner and sit him where she would normally sit. Now when you seat somebody where you are normally seated yourself, this is not because there isn't space elsewhere, it's because you want to show them adab and acknowledgement. It's to show that acknowledgement. And this is a sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not just in the house, but outside the house as well. The Sahabi says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I came and he made space for me. And I said, Ya Rasulullah, there's space here to sit. But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam expressed that a mu'min has this right that when he comes to you, you make space for him. So it was the adab and etiquette of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this applies to children as well. Our Shaykh rahimahullah ta'ala, he would address his children one by one. Those who spent time with him and travelled with him mentioned that his young children, but he would talk to them individually and they would all be given attention. So this is a sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is something which we ought to build up from an early age. The children should not just be sort of running around us and they just happen to be our children. And we just, as long as they're not running into the road and they're getting fed, that kind of attitude towards child minding, that style of parenting, it's not adequate. It's not adequate, and it's not just about the times that we live in. It's about any times. This is not an appropriate way of parenting children. So children need acknowledgement. They need that parental attention, that motherly, fatherly attention, in which there is a one-to-one communication, in which our minds are not preoccupied with 1,000 other things. And that takes us to our next point, and that is this. Now we're going to go through a little list here, but before I do that, what I want to say is children will ask their parents questions. And when children ask their parents questions from an early age, that interest of the child should not be silenced. This is hugely damaging to the development of the child if the child is never allowed to ask a question. Children will ask questions because of curiosity, because they have an appetite for knowledge. The wide-eyed child who is intrigued and fascinated by the world around. And so if the child asks a question, there are two situations, shall we say, broadly speaking. One situation from this perspective, one situation is that you know the answer, and the other is that you don't. And then the other aspect of this is whether it's appropriate to answer that child at that point in time. So if you know the answer and it's appropriate to tell the child the answer to the question they've asked, then you should answer it in full. And if you don't have time, then you should actually make a point of doing it later. And if you don't have the answer to the question, but it's a question which should be answered, then you should actually humbly tell your child that, you know, I'm going to get back to you on this one. I'll answer this question later. And as a parent, you should take the trouble to find out. Something else is coming to my mind this minute, and I won't leave it out because I think it's beneficial. It's not permissible to lie to your children just for convenience. It's not permissible. You are obliged to fulfill your promises towards your children. So this means that if you promise your child a treat, if they agree to doing something that you've asked them to do, then you need to fulfill that. That's your obligation. Otherwise, don't make the promise. Do not make empty promises. It's not only not permissible, you will destroy your own reputation with your own children, and they will not learn from your example. So when you promise your child something, fulfill the promise. And if you don't intend to fulfill it, don't make the promise. But that was on a side point. To come back to my initial point, if your child asks you a question and it's appropriate to be answered, it should be answered. So now let's go through a few scenarios, different age groups, and different types of questions which children might ask. Children might ask questions about their belief, their iman, about Allah. Those questions are of huge importance. And this is why the very first sounds which we are taught to utter into the ears of our children are the words of adhan. And this is a complete da'wah in itself. The Prophet ﷺ has referred to it as a da'wat tamma. Allahumma rabba hadhi da'wat tamma, the complete invitation. So this gives us an idea, even before the child has learned to speak. It's as though the name of Allah is being embossed and imprinted upon his psyche, the child's mind. And this is a situation when the child's ruh has already come through from alamul arwah and acknowledged alastu bi rabbikum. The child has already acknowledged the creator. So being received into the dunya and into this world of flesh and blood, because in the previous world the child was just a ruh, a soul. There was no physical creation. Now the physical earthly matter is influencing and bearing heavily onto the ruh of the child. So now the ruh has to wake up inside and come of age inside this new existence. So you're inviting the child into the dunya with Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. So if a child asks questions relating to Allah, then they should be answered. Now that means that we too should know Allah Ta'ala. We should know enough to talk about it to our children. Now a nice simple point on this about Tawheed, this is beneficial for us all. Let us remember that when we talk about Allah, then we're not allowed to compare Allah to the creation. We're not allowed to compare Allah to the creation. Allah Ta'ala says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There's nothing like Allah Ta'ala. This is known as tashbih. We're not allowed to compare Allah to the creation. Nor are we allowed to compare the creation to Allah. This is shirk. This is when somebody is described as having the knowledge that Allah has, or the power that Allah has, and so forth. So the abilities that Allah has. So this is shirk. So we don't compare Allah to His creation, and we don't compare the creation to Allah. So then, how do we know Allah? Through His signs and through His revelation, through His prophets, through His signs and through His revelation, His prophets. So we ought to be able to talk about Allah Ta'ala to our children. This is important. And of course this applies to all of the beliefs. Amantu billahi wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusulihi wal yawmil akhiri wal qadri khayrihi wa sharrihi min Allah Ta'ala wal ba'thi ba'da al-maut. All of the imaniyat, all of the beliefs. We ought to be able to talk about these. Moving on, a question that children often ask their parents is, where do children come from? Now this may be a difficult one for parents to answer, and it's one in which you need to be sensitive. Now, what you mustn't do on this occasion, whatever you do, what you mustn't do is tell your children a lie. Make some fabricated fairy tale up. That's not appropriate. Remember, Allah talks about how He created us in the Quran, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions this in the Hadith. And so, there are some aspects which can easily be shared with children at an early age. When is appropriate? This is a parental decision. What I will say is, what's happening today and shouldn't be happening is that it's not spoken about at all, and information isn't made available to children at all. So the child has no understanding of what they believe in, what their deen teaches them. They're not brought up to understand that. And so there are some simple points which can be mentioned here, and they may be of use to parents who have children of various ages, how to talk about this discussion. And I'm talking about one aspect of it here. The aspect is that we didn't exist and Allah created us. And this is talking about Allah being Khaliq, Allah being the creator. So Allah created us. This particular belief, to teach this to children, Allah made us. He's our creator. And then, if and when appropriate, it can be mentioned in very simple terms that we were created from. The simple words to use are, and this word is used in the Quran, a drop of water. The word water can be used here. That we were originally a drop of water. And then we grew into a human being. And there are various stages. Then Allah Ta'ala made us into the water, became a clot of blood. And then the clot of blood became a lump of flesh. And then the lump of flesh became a skeleton. And this was then covered with flesh, and we became complete human beings. And this is in the Quran. I'm taking this directly from the Quran. So this kind of discussion, and then Allah Ta'ala put our ruh inside us, and the angels wrote down our time of death as well, and how much rizq we would have in this dunya, and what kind of people we would be. Our destiny was recorded. So these kinds of things can be mentioned. So an appropriate discussion can be had with children in an appropriate way, and this is conceptually understood. It does not need a pictorial description of diagrams of procreation. This isn't required, and this is not something which human beings have struggled to understand through the centuries. It's been straightforward. People have always understood these points. So this is something which parents need to acknowledge. This may be necessary, because when you don't teach them from the Tawheed point of view, then the belief aspect of this is removed from the whole discussion. And so there are two aspects of this in terms of educating young people. One aspect is the fact that Allah is our creator and the different stages of our creation. That's one aspect, and we can talk about this directly from the Quran. There are so many verses. The second aspect is teaching them Kitabut Tahara, the chapter of purity from the books of fiqh, which relates to when ghusl becomes farz for males and for females, and what tahara is. This includes istinja, it includes wudu, it includes tayammum, it includes mash, and when you can do it, it includes how you can wipe over a bandage. So it's quite comprehensive. It's about how to purify your body if you have something on it, or your item, your clothing. It's about how to purify something else like a utensil, and so on and so forth. And so it's about how to purify porous objects and non-porous objects. So this whole discussion about purity, within it includes the whole process of coming of age for males and females, and the discussion of when ghusl becomes farz. It includes within it other necessary detail of relationships between couples and so forth. Now, when you do this, the implication is, because fiqh is taken from the Quran and Sunnah, it's nur. And because the Quran itself is the kalam of Allah, it's nur, it's hidayah. So when you teach the Quranic perspective of creation and procreation, and you teach the fiqh perspective in terms of our obligations, and of course you can add to this the muharramat, who can be married and not married when the time is appropriate. And we're talking about early teens here, early teens. If we're talking about this subject, if it's taught from a book, now what will happen? The implications of establishing those relationships and the definition of nikah. What now happens is these young people have a, if I can put it like this, a nurani perspective. They have a perspective into adult life and family life and procreation and relationships, which is from the Quran and Sunnah. So their heart now has something to relate to. What's actually happening is we just leave them in free fall, in limbo. So they come to their own decisions, and then they actually grow out of their teens into their 20s, and still there's no discussion. And then the son, the daughter, having given up on waiting for you, the parent, make their own choices, and then you blow up because it's not your choice. This is what we're seeing in our society. Now, whose fault is it? If you want to have that mutuality in this process of making the decision, you know, if you want to have some participation, then where were you for the last 10 years of this person's life? And I'm conservative estimate. I'm talking about in reality. The reality is in our society, we have young brothers and sisters whose parents haven't begun the discourse about marriage and family life, and these young people are out of their 20s. Subhanallah, subhanallah. It's a very sad state of affairs. And then when the children, if we can use the word children, make their own choices about their marriage partners, they're treated as though they're committing a sin. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Neither did you assist them to find their on this path, nor were you before they found their own way, nor were you useful to them afterwards. You didn't give them that parental love. And then you suddenly, and forgive me for being so direct, I'm not assuming that this is everybody's situation, but you now remember when this is all happened, and you know, things have gotten out of hand as far as your perspective is. It's not, you have no influence on the matter now, and you wanted to have influence on the matter. All of a sudden, you now remember your parental rights, and you want your children to obey you. What happened in the last 10 years when you were not there for them? So I'm actually relating this to my earlier points. I'm saying that if we have this discussion from those early years, and we have we treat children with respect, and at each stage of their development, we make that input, and parents who are literate, and you are literate if you're listening to me now, if you can understand what I'm saying, then parents should be aware about the syllabus, the curriculum which is taught to children in their schools, so that our input and our discussions can relate to what they're being taught and what they're being exposed to. We should be aware of this. Now, I'm embarrassed to say this to you, but let me say to you that perhaps it's your child. Teenagers in our city are given, what can I say, cucumbers in classes in order to be taught about how to use contraceptives. 12 and 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds. Is that your child? You are unaware of the fact that this is happening without any consultation with yourself. You don't know what your children are being exposed to and shown on the screen, what they are being taught. The mannequins which are brought into the class, mannequins, lifelike mannequins, and how they're used for the same purpose. So it's an embarrassing subject for me to talk about in this way to you. Well, as a parent, what's your responsibility? Is it then surprising with children exposed to pornography on smartphones and screens, and you having no communication with them and having never discussed the subject? Is it surprising then that we have a complete sort of disparity between the mindset of the young people and the parents? You're in one planet and they're on another. So this needs to be bridged, and we need to find ways of doing it. Now, there are many other subjects. It's not just this subject. when we talk about and I'm not, again, I always acknowledge that when I'm talking about these issues, I don't intend to generalize. We're talking about a certain trend that we tend to see. I'm not generalizing. Different people are in different circumstances. But generally speaking, I think there is something in this discussion for everybody, at least to think about. But it's not just about this. Let's talk about things in a more general way. So you're at a time when emotional health, mental health is being spoken about. Your children and their mental health, their sort of sense of well-being, and their ability to communicate that to you, or your ability to communicate that to them, that interaction, is it there? Can they talk to you in the way that friends talk to each other, or is that lost? So this is another area about talking about emotional health, for example. Now, on this point, if young people, when they are children of primary school age perhaps, if they are helped to express, if you assist them in expressing their emotional state, because you talk about how they are feeling, if they learn how to express themselves, this may go a long way in their adult life. If they know how they are feeling and they can express this and talk about it, let's say a problem shared is a problem halved. So when you can talk about someone about your problems to somebody, it may become much easier to deal with them. So young people, talking to them about their state of mind. So if a child is happy or sad, and you talk to them in that moment, and you ask them to talk about how they're feeling, and you help them describe those feelings, so that they can learn to talk about different states of mind, then that may be very useful. Words and psychology are deeply intertwined. And so when children have a way of conceptualizing and expressing their emotions, they may be in a position to share their burden and also to get assistance from parents and elders when they are in a difficult situation. So this is another area. So we're talking about discourse. Now I'm going to touch on another. Okay, just this last point, and then inshallah I think we can start taking some of your questions. And this is about when children have let you down. And when I say children, I'm saying in a broader sense. I'm talking about adolescents as well. They're still your children. If something has happened which has led to a breakdown of relationship and things are getting out of hand, and I've touched on this theme in sessions recent times quite frequently, once this happens, then you don't want to close all the doors. And so what you need to do, what you can do, what may be a solution or a path to a solution, and I don't underestimate the task, is to change the whole approach to this. So if your child has let you down, whether it's about something they've done or whatever the situation may be, in order to be able to assist them, you need to have their confidence. So you may have to change your style entirely. And so rather than talking to them from sort of the paternal, the maternal and paternal instinct, in which you talk down to them in a particular way, with the idea of authority, it might become necessary to talk to them the way you might talk to somebody else's child, in the sense that you treat them as a young person, but you don't speak in a way that suggests entitlement and obedience and sitting to attention, because you may not have that, you may have lost that. So the confidence has to be rebuilt. And you can avoid talking about problems and challenging topics until that confidence is established. And then after that too, the issues which need to be spoken about can be spoken about very, very sort of carefully, approached in a way, because as soon as the discussion becomes heated and it becomes a shouting match, there's no progress. Now, I hope what I'm saying is of some benefit. I'm just trying to establish some pointers here. Let us just sort of summarize a couple of points. We started with discourse, and we're talking about different types of discourse here. We're talking about seeing the family as a unit. We're talking about open channels of communication. we're talking about dealing with difficult subjects, we're talking about stepping in at the right time, and we're talking about ways in which you can discuss problems, and we're talking about your input as a parent when it comes to particular aspects of life and education relating to those aspects. Ji.
Assalamu alaikum. We have a number of questions today, so we'll start off straight away. First question today. My son, this is from a mother. My son has a group of friends who are up to no good, and I am trying to distance him from them. How do I do this?
My son has a group of friends and who are up to no good, and I'm trying to distance him from those friends. How do I do this? Now, first of all, it's not clear what age group the son is. So this is one area, because at different age groups, it depends. I mean, you wouldn't give the independence to a primary school child that you would to an adolescent, a teenager. So this is one area. Let's assume that this question relates to a teenage child. One approach, which is not a direct approach, and it'll just be part of the solution, may be that there are more fun opportunities as a family unit. Now, over time, I've come to be convinced that there's a very important aspect of family holidays, and if your circumstances allow, and we're talking not just about lockdown, beyond lockdown, but outside of these, I mean, inshallah, if things return to some relative normality, talking about, on a day-to-day basis, it's very important that parents don't see money spent on family holidays as a waste, if they're done with this intention, so you can devote time alone, away from everything. So if you give your your children an opportunity to have a lot of fun, some excitement, some adventure as part of a family unit, this may go some way in sort of diverting them. This is one point. The other point is we need to build up that relationship, that friendship with our children, so that we can talk to them openly. And then, now clearly you've said that they're up to no good. Now this is sort of a vague term. Now you'll know what you're talking about. So the no good that you're talking about, it may be about talking about the harms of that no good, whatever type of lifestyle we're talking about here. Having a discussion with your children, rather than talking about the friendship, talking about the consequences of those actions. And I'll say again, with these points, the other point is again the dua aspect of the parent. The dua aspect is very important. Support your children with dua, and never give them, never curse your own children. So as I say, these are just a part of this. This isn't necessarily the full solution, but it's part of this. What's missing in their life? How much time are they spending with those friends? Is it out on the streets? Is it online? And what can we do to sort of make some input into their pastime? Ji.
Next question again is from a mother. My son is 9 years old, and I need advice on how to deal with him. He has anger issues, constantly breaking things, and self-harming at times.
My son is 9, he has anger issues. How do I deal with him? Constant anger issues, breaking things, and self-harm. Now, the self-harm aspect, I would say this is beyond my remit, because it's a very specialist area, and it's an important area, and you should seek advice on this through, and research this and learn about it and contact the relevant people as a matter of urgency and as a matter of responsibility. But generally speaking, of course, children will have phases, and they won't always be in their best moments. We need to see what triggers this. We need to see if it's a medical condition. We need to see if the child, their general lifestyle, are they happy in their sort of? Is there something which makes them unhappy, which has an impact on them? Is there something else, some other factor, which is causing this anger to spill over? It's about having a good time when the child is in a better mood. It's about how we respond to that anger. So it's a combination of different things. It may even be diet, and so forth. So I mean, I can't give you any. I'm afraid I can just touch on some aspects But I would say that the earlier points I made are also relevant to some degree, because it's about how we talk to the child in these situations. How we talk to the child in those situations, and it's about pastimes as well, how the child's 24 hours are being passed, what the routines of the child are, sleeping patterns perhaps, gaming, and those types of things. What is the child's online activity sort of profile, and so forth. Ji.
During the lockdown, my children are either watching TV or on their phones, and I cannot get them to do anything. They are all late teens and at a point where they don't listen. Can you help me?
Okay, so the children are always either watching TV or gaming on their phones. They're in their late teens, and I don't seem to
get them to listen.
Yes, we are. We've got here, haven't we? We've got to see how we got here. We got here because of missed opportunities in the past. Now, the purpose of me mentioning this is not because I'm saying it's the end. There's no progress to be made, but we have to look backwards and see how we got to this situation. Now, having got this far, all that we can do is begin to re-establish that channel of communication. I keep mentioning this channel of communication because you have to get through to them, not because you're having an angry rant at them, but because they want to listen. And that will happen when you can talk to them in a calmer, cooler way from time to time. Now, if you have several teenage children and this is the general condition, then it is a sad state of affairs. It might be about beginning to do some activity together. What I said earlier about the holiday aspect, that might be part of the solution. It might be about taking meals together. It'll have to be baby steps. And then, as appropriate, it's about talking to them. It's about talking to them about their future development, their careers, their studies. It's a combination of these things. So it's not going to be any single point here. It's going to be a combination. Again, I say it's all related to some of the points I've made earlier. Ji.
How important do you think it is to teach children their mother language, whether that be Urdu, Gujarati, Arabic, etc.?
How important do you think it is to teach children their mother language, be it Urdu, Gujarati, Arabic, whatever? I think it's very important. I think that cultural sort of grounding and anchoring is essential. I think children have the capacity of learning multiple languages at the same time, and contrary to the belief of some parents, it does not restrict their ability to learn English. Quite the opposite. Children who are multilingual can often perform better. There are huge benefits, and it's a life skill as well. And it's about being able to relate to their origin, and the human family is one big family. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. Allah Ta'ala has given us different ethnicities and connected us to different clans and tribes so that we can be distinct. We can have a distinct identity, and to maintain that is fine. And this is not the same as racism, in which you consider one race to be superior or inferior to another. Quite the opposite. The maintenance of ethnic identity is one thing, and racism is another. And so there is no need for any person of any ethnicity or language to have any sense of inferiority. And so it is absolutely appropriate to take forward your family traditions and your Dini traditions, and part of the way of doing that is through language. And talking as a British-born person, I mean, I would say that today's sort of matrix of British identities is actually a consequence of British history. British history is connected to the world over, and the multi-ethnic sort of society that we see today is a consequence of that. Britain is tied at every level, socially, economically, historically, politically, to all the continents of the world. And so I don't see there being any conflict between being an English speaker and a British citizen and a speaker of any other language, whether it's an African language or an Asian language or Arabic or some other language. So absolutely this should be maintained. Ji.
When is the best time to discuss marriage with your children, and how to go about this?
When is the best time to discuss marriage with your children and how to go about this? I think that it should be discussed as soon as the children reach of age. We're talking about early teens here. And this is not because you may be making that plan for them at that point in time. It's because they need to know that this is something which is something on the cards. It's something which is going to happen, and you have those thoughts for them, because they may be attracted towards relationships, drawn into relationships well before you are aware. They may be aware. You may consider someone to be a child in your mind. They're still a baby, but in their world they have other ideas and other thoughts. And so this is important, and this isn't just the reason. The other reason is the teachings of our deen and the halal and haram of this. What is permissible and what is not permissible? What is the definition of nikah? How are they to know? If you've never taught them, how are they to know what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do as Muslims? Where are they going to get that information from? Unfortunately, and I'm not happy with this, unfortunately, in our Quranic classes in the masajid, children tend to leave by the age of about 12 anyway. So they're not with their teachers at an age when they need to learn about these things, and they're not taught. Children are not taught these subjects. The only time they can learn is if they come to these classes as adults classes for marriage, or their parents talk about it. So they don't have access to what is, fard ayn. Every young person needs to know the halal and haram of anything which relates to their day-to-day life. So this isn't too late at all. It's actually very appropriate to talk about marriage during the early teens, and how this includes aspects which we've already mentioned. The Quranic description of how Allah Ta'ala created us is related to the maharim, who you can and cannot marry. It's related to Kitab al-Tahara, which includes aspect of this, and later on Kitab al-Nikah, the fiqh rulings of nikah in general. One problem which we have today is that so many people have no idea about when talaq happens and it doesn't happen. They only learn about it after it's already happened, and other solutions about mitigating marriage problems and sorting things out between couples and helping them in this way. So this is all part and parcel of our fiqh, but unfortunately young people aren't taught this. So that would be the next stage. But the initial stage would be to talk about marriage, precisely what is marriage, what is nikah, that it's a contract and so forth, and what it includes and entails.
What is the best way to explain to children why, as Muslims, we don't do things that are haram? When I try to explain, they say their friends do this and they are also Muslim.
Right. What is the best way to explain to our children why things are haram? When I say this to them, they say their friends do this and they're also Muslim. It's about continuing to talk about our obligation towards our Creator, Allah Azza wa Jal. It's about talking about the Akhirah. It's about talking about how Allah Azza wa Jal has made this life into a test. And see, if we are in a situation where the children are openly rejecting everything we say to them, then it's a cause of concern. And this means that we need to build a foundation again. The foundation is talking about deen, not just when we... See, if the children are not ready to receive this message, this is halal, this is haram, then it's about talking about the basic beliefs. It's about talking about the basic beliefs and educating them about deen in a basic way, from the very basics, that Allah is one, Allah Ta'ala sent His Anbiya alayhimu salatu wassalam to this world. We all believe in the Akhirah, there is Jannah, there is Jahannam, angels write our a'mal down, and so forth. Now, the other point is that the love of deen is built up through personalities as well. And these personalities begin first and foremost with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Anbiya. So it's about reading their seerah, and this is why a very valuable way of creating a forum, an environment in which dini issues can be discussed, is about sitting together as a family and reading. Somebody reads and everybody listens. A book of seerah, for example, a book of fada'il, and so forth.
You spoke about sex education in schools earlier. How can we engage with our children on this subject, and also how do we bring it up with our school?
How can we engage with our children relating to sex education? How can we bring it up with our school? With reference to our children, I've already mentioned, it's about teaching them the verses of the Quran, and it's about direct translations, which talk about how Allah Ta'ala created us and those stages. So this is why I simplified it. I mentioned specifically the word water, because children don't have to understand what sperm is in order for them to understand what water is. A very young child can understand what water is, and you don't have to bring procreation into this, where the couples come together. You don't have to mention this for young children. You just mention that we were created from a drop of water, because Allah Ta'ala has described this as a drop of water as well in the Quran. So we can talk about it from, so it depends on the age of the child. So if the child is older, then, and the other point is, I mentioned this in an earlier session, we can give them material to read from here to here. We can give them material to read, and if it corresponds to what they're already being taught elsewhere, then they'll understand the meaning of it too. So what's awkward for us or inappropriate as well, so for example, it may be inappropriate for a father to talk about certain things to his daughter, so he can just make the information available to her so she can read it herself. And this is the way the Salaf used to do it, and they still do it. So this is an appropriate way. With reference to the school, remember that as a faith community, it's not about if we have a view as to how these subjects should be taught. This needs to be a constructive engagement. You don't sort of pick up the phone and have a debate and an angry exchange with a member of staff. There's an appropriate way. It's about engaging with other parents. It's about engaging with schools in an appropriate way, asking for time when they're ready to talk about it, learning about the curriculum by simply, you can check on educational websites about what's taught in the curriculum, and then being aware of what's being taught, and also your right as a parent to choose what you want your children to participate in class and what you want to exclude them from, so that they're given some other appropriate academic activity during that time. So this is a process, and it requires wisdom, and it requires communication with the school, with appropriate members of the school, and it requires knowledge of the curriculum as well. So there's a combination of all of these things. Well,
let's have that's 10 o'clock, it's nearly Maghrib time, we'll need to stop there. We can catch up with the other questions on the next program.
Yeah, inshallah. So any remaining questions, if we have time, inshallah, we'll try to catch up with those in the next program. In the meantime, I ask Allah Ta'ala to make what we've said a source of benefit for us all, and to make all of our children, your children, a source of happiness for us in our dunya and akhirah, and give them success in their deen, dunya and akhirah. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, wa salamun ala al-mursalin, walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.